We will have that available to you after the summit's over. I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to my counterpart, Tiffany Boyd, to go ahead and introduce herself. And then we'll kick it over to Jonathan to introduce himself and then kick it over to the speakers. Tiffany?
Thanks, Jennifer. My name is Tiffany Boyd, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jonathan, who is going to handle all the next slides. So welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Tiffany. And have we started recording? All right. Welcome, everybody, to this session. We're looking at policy solutions to address urban challenges, and we've got a great group of speakers lined up today. We're not in webinar form, which you may have noticed, so you are able to turn on your cameras and your microphones, but we will ask you to keep yourself muted. In a few minutes here, we're going to do a little icebreaker, in which case you may turn your cameras off so we have the panelists on there exclusively to play a little game, although you can play along as well. Before we do that, I want to introduce everyone you'll be hearing from today. Once again, I'm Jonathan Wachtel. I'm the Sustainability Manager for the City of Lakewood, involved with a little bit of everything around sustainability planning for the city, and was honored to have the opportunity in 2015 to lead the development and the adoption of the city's first sustainability plan, and have been working on implementation since, with some successes and some challenges, in particular around waste. So this is a subject near and dear to me. I'd like to thank Jennifer Freeman and Tiffany Boyd for being our champions of this session. Tiffany, one of our co-champions, has taught in the Boulder Valley School District for 27 years and currently is the Director of Classrooms for Climate Action and a member of the Louisville Sustainability Advisory Board. And her passion is to create pathways for young people to have a voice and make an impact for climate and climate justice in their own communities. And Jennifer introduced herself, but I've got a little more info about her. She's the Director of Public Relations, Government Affairs, and Sustainability for Swire Coca-Cola. She's responsible for managing external relationships and issues with government officials, third-party stakeholders, and industry organizations and community partners. In addition, she also works to address critical issues, small challenges like recycling and water and workforce development and women's empowerment with partners, their customers, with government officials and other agencies. She's got a bachelor's degree in international study from the University of South Carolina and a master's degree from the University of Denver's Corbel School of International Studies. And I think she mentioned she is the co-president of the board of directors for Recycle Colorado, along with several other advisory boards, and she's a proud mom and citizen of Thornton, Colorado. So thanks, Jennifer and Tiffany. And they will be fielding your questions in the chat box and getting them to me, and we'll hold questions until we're done with the three presentations, and then we'll give you ample time to ask those. So thanks, Tiffany and Jennifer, for helping with all those logistics. Now I'd like to introduce who you're going to hear from in terms of the presentations. I'm going to do it all now so we can just go from one presentation to another. And maybe our speakers will just do a real short reintroduction when they start their presentations. We have Nancy Ford, Councilor Nancy Ford, with us. She's on Arvada's City Council and serves as the liaison to Arvada Sustainability Advisory Committee and the Rocky Flats Stewardship Council. She's the founder and research consultant of Ford Research Group, where she designed consumer research on green marketing and waste collection. Nancy is passionate about an environment that supports clean air, food, and water, and has been instrumental in some of the big achievements taking place in Arvada that you'll hear about here in a few minutes. We also have Randy Moorman with us today. Randy is probably everybody knows Randy, but I'll introduce you anyway. Randy is the Director of Community Campaigns at EcoCycle. He's a resident of Arvada and was appointed to the Arvada Sustainability Advisory Committee in 2016, where he's been championing the committee's efforts to change the city's waste hauling system. No small feat. Congratulations on some of the work there. And for the past 3.5 years, Randy has also served on Recycle Colorado's board of directors and as the chair and co-chair of the policy committee, and some great work there. So thank you, Randy. Then we'll hear from City of Fort Collins, and with Caroline Mitchell, who's the lead waste reduction and recycling specialist at the City of Fort Collins. Caroline has developed waste reduction and recycling policy. She coordinates education and is known as the waste data geek for the city of Fort Collins, as well as supporting recycling in the business and multifamily sectors. Welcome, Caroline. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It doesn't stop there. Then we're going to hear from the city of Boulder, and we have Kara Mertz with us from the city of Boulder. She graduated in 1988 from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a civil and environmental engineering degree. After graduation, she moved to San Francisco and worked with the cities of Fremont, Union City, and others as a regional recycling coordinator. And after a temporary assignment as the chief science officer at a commercial food and yard waste composting firm in New Jersey, her love of the mountains inspired her to settle in Colorado, where she has worked for the city of Boulder for the past 26 years. Kara manages Boulder's zero waste programs. She and her team are working to develop a circular materials strategy for the city. We heard a lot about that earlier today. That's amazing, amazing work taking place there. So that Boulder can move beyond recycling and composting their waste into a larger system of material use and consumption. Thank you, Kara. And then finally, we also are joined by Sandy Briggs from Boulder. Sandy's a Boulder native, a lifelong environmental advocate. She graduated from Colorado State University in 1992 with a degree in sociology and criminal justice with the intention to go into environmental law. But before embarking on her path to law school, she discovered that she had an innate desire to serve, work in the trenches, and get her hands dirty. So instead of law school, she landed at the city of Boulder as part of the zero waste team. Sandy is working on developing and advancing a circular materials economy as part of the city's climate mobilization action plan, and is also a certified code enforcement official. I don't know if she has her pad with today to write us up if we don't do the right thing here. Managing and enforcing the city's universal zero waste ordinance. So welcome, Sandy. Thank you to everybody, and thanks for everyone's patience as we do all the intros. And we look forward to hearing from everybody. But before we do that, we're gonna do a little icebreaker, get to know our panelists and our communities that we're gonna be hearing from. So I'm gonna stop sharing. Did I stop sharing? Excuse me. All right. Should be able to see everybody now. And if you want just a view of folks with their cameras on, there should be a setting there. We're gonna play a little game of where each of our panelists, I'm gonna ask a question and they're gonna have to tell us, which community is the correct answer. Some of these, so they can hold up a card that either says Arvada, Boulder, or Fort Collins. And if you all want to play along at home, you can do the same, or you can throw it in the chat box. I've got a few questions, some of which we're going to start with a little history, get to know the communities, then a little waste-related trivia, and then a couple at the end that don't have a right answer, so we'll see what everyone thinks. If you want to, like I said, if you want to play along at home, you can throw that in the chat box. So I think it's 1:10. I'm going to look at my timing. I think we're good. We've got about 5 minutes, which is perfect. Are all of our panelists and champions ready to go? Thumbs up. Okay, we'll start with some that I think should be fairly easy. We'll see. First question is, which community was the location of the first documented gold discovery in the Rocky Mountains? I see some Arvadas. Nancy, I can't really see yours, I think, because of your back screen, but I'm guessing yours says Arvada since you're a city councilor there, and that is the correct answer.
It does.
All right, Lewis Ralston found a 1/4 ounce of gold worth $5. And his companions named the stream where they found it Ralston Stream after him, and then left the next morning for California, where they were promised much more gold. So, all right. Next question, which community was originally founded to provide protection for an important mail route to ensure efficient mail delivery? Wow, yes, Fort Collins is the answer. That was the Overland Trail mail delivery. All right. Next, which of our 3 communities has the smallest total land area? Nancy, you're gonna have to tell us out loud what your answer is because we can't read.
I'm going to be opposite. I said Arvada.
It is actually Boulder. And, by about 10 miles smaller than Arvada. And Fort Collins by far the largest. Boulder is about 27 square miles and Arvada is 39 and Fort Collins is close to 60 square miles. All right, staying in history, which community was once referred to as the lamb feeding capital of the world?
Fort Collins.
That's correct. It was Fort Collins. And in a similar question, which community was once considered the celery capital of the world and has had their celery served at the White House?
Arvada.
I think Randy's quick answer tipped everybody else off. It was Arvada. Okay, and which community once strongly considered an ordinance requiring dog owners to submit DNA samples in order to identify owners that failed to pick up after their pets? Was it that easy? Yes, it is Boulder. All right, and which community is home to the first ever King Superstore? All right, Arvada is correct.
Yep.
All right. Couple more here, and then we'll get into our sessions. Sticking with grocery stores, one of these communities requires grocery stores to compost any food that's not donated for repurpose. Who's that?
Boulder.
It's actually Fort Collins, unless Boulder also does the same. But I know for sure Fort Collins does. Caroline's doing a little dance.
Yeah.
Oh, Boulder does too. Okay, I missed it. All right, both good answers. Which community was home to the infamous Balloon Boy hoax in October of 2009? It was Fort Collins. And according to TripAdvisor.com, visiting the Totally 80s Pizza and Museum is the 5th most popular activity in which of these communities? I can't stump you guys. You're on it. All right, I've just got a couple more and then we'll get going. Which community actually has a web page that features a large poop emoji instructing its residents that pet waste cannot be recycled and needs to go in the trash?
It's funny, we're all talking about other communities. Not
Yeah.
one. Not
It's
one.
Fort Collins. You have a full page that's just got a big poop emoji on it. It's awesome. It's in your directory where you can look up stuff. All right. Let's see. Let's finish this up. Which community currently claims the highest community-wide waste diversion rate?
Community-wide.
Boulder. I just saw that in the paper. 50%. Right?
According to the information you all sent me, Fort Collins claims 51%.
Oh.
Boulder may have been higher, but with better data has revised their numbers down to 50%. So for the time being.
That's correct. In 2018, we were at 57%. In 2019, we were at 50% because we QC'd our data.
Fort Collins big numbers are because we include the industrial material that a lot of communities don't. So if you look at the community diversion rate, it includes a lot more materials than a lot of communities count.
The transparency coming full light here. All right, and the last two, there's not a correct answer here. We'll just see opinions. Which community do we think is most likely, where did I put my notes here, is most likely to pass an ordinance requiring Frisbee golfers to pick up and sort trash while frothing? I don't see any votes for Arvada. I don't know.
We do have good Frisbee golf.
That's true, you do.
And a lot of great parks, a tremendous amount of amazing parks. You got there. And finally, which of your communities has the best historic downtown? Maybe this is one for the chat box for our attendees. We can make this a little competition.
Yeah.
Oh, I saw someone said all of them. I like that.
Yeah.
All three. You do all three have amazing downtowns. Which is great stuff. All right. Thank you all for playing along. Trying to make these online sessions a little more entertaining. I'm going to move us now into our presentations. Each of our presentations will be about 10 minutes, and I may interrupt your speakers to give them a little countdown warning as we get close to their time limit. We're going to start with the city of Arvada, and after all three sessions or presentations are done, we'll do question and answer, and then we're going to leave ourselves a nice chunk of time towards the end for the second part of the session to go into some breakouts. And we've got 3 rooms, one for each of the topics and presenters, so that you have an opportunity to ask deeper follow-up questions and get more nuanced information from each of the speakers. And so we'll look forward to that. If you didn't sign up ahead of time for one of those breakout rooms, then just stick around where we are right now. And after we send everybody to their breakouts, I'll see who's left and I can get you where you want to go. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Nancy Ford from the city of Arvada. Nancy, take us away.
Thanks, Jonathan. Welcome, everyone. Randy and I are delighted to share with you the 9-year process that enabled an organized waste hauling ordinance to be passed in the city of Arvada. Next slide, please.
So we wanted to start with the question, what is organized trash and recycling, and define it. The main component of it is that either the city contracts with a hauler or haulers to provide residential waste collection, or then the city provides it through its own operations, like in the city of Denver or the city of Longmont. In our case, we are in Arvada are contracting with one hauler, and we are only providing the service for non-HOA homes, unless HOAs want to opt in on their own, they may do so. From a recycling angle, organized waste hauling will bundle in recycling as part of the service, and it will no longer then be an opt-in with an additional fee. So that is a huge benefit for our community. And then finally, our program will also include volume-based pricing, or commonly known as pay-as-you-throw, where residents are charged for different rates for their trash based on the size of their trash cart. Next slide, please.
Arvada is a growing city. As the 8th largest city in Colorado, it now has the distinction of also being the largest city to have an organized waste hauling contract that will service approximately 32,000 homes that don't have an HOA. Next slide, please.
Our current system is what is known as an open market system, which requires residents in non-HOA homes to contact and set up waste hauling with one of our 7 haulers. This system is inefficient and costly because there are more trucks on our neighborhood streets, and trash trucks are by far the heaviest vehicles. It causes significant road damage and air pollution and noise and safety concerns. The drawing on the bottom right of this slide really exemplifies the problems that we are seeing in our neighborhoods. This is from one of our residents who lives in a dead-end street, and she has 14 homes and sees 9 trucks on her one short street a week. We also know that residents in non-HOA homes are paying more than HOA homes for the same services, up to 76% more, around between $20 and $29 a month. And based on a city study from 2011, under this current system, our recycling rate is around 13%. And 60% of our vans don't have a recycle bin or cart. And this is because it is inconvenient. They have to request it from one of their haulers and then pay extra for that service. So there is an economic disadvantage to recycle. Next slide, please.
Even though other cities had failed to pass similar measures, and council members in 2011 had actually received death threats, Arvada continued to pursue an organized waste hauling contract and ordinance because the majority of Arvada residents stated they wanted more recycling options and lower costs. New residents moving in from other locations who had already been recycling wanted these same services. They recognized the wastefulness of multiple trash trucks on the roads. Next slide, please.
What we found to be successful in making this major policy change were three major components of what we are calling an inside-outside strategy. Along with having dedicated city staff who want to see the policy succeed and city council members who are passionate about getting it passed, the inside part, we also had an outside part or grassroots residents group, the Arvada Sustainability Advisory Committee, or ASAC, that worked very hard on the outside to build support for the change. Next slide, please.
Arvada had many things going for it on the inside. Our former sustainability coordinator, Jessica Prosser, was a champion of the cause. Our city manager, who came from California, where organized waste hauling and recycling is common, was very supportive. We had a well-developed and purposeful communication strategy that included ASAC, who monitored social media to counter negative or inaccurate facts with education and not argument. The graphic on this slide was created to easily communicate the new program and what it will offer. Our finance team negotiated a strong contract and found money from our water fund to loan for the $3.2 million needed for the recycling carts. We had a well-informed industry consultant and received a $500,000 recycle partnership grant to purchase recycled carts, for which we are very grateful. All of this continued despite COVID-19. Next slide, please.
The Arvada Sustainability Advisory Committee, or ASAC, was formed in 2011, soon after the first failed attempt to pass organized waste and recycling hauling. The committee, once formed, developed a sustainability plan for the city that included waste goals. These goals were important to reference as the committee later advocated for the change to an organized system. For 2 years leading up to the city council vote, ASAC worked very hard to educate the public on waste and recycling, and in particular, the benefits of changing to an organized system. We made presentations to community groups and tabled at events. While we were engaging the community, we also circulated a letter to council and gathered 500 signatures asking council to consider a policy change. This was important in getting council to put it on their strategic plan for 2019 and gave ASAC a good list of residents to contact when it came time to show support. Through our efforts and our collaboration with other community groups like Arvadans for Progressive Action, we were able to get a large turnout of residents who either contacted council via email or testified at the public hearing. Next slide, please.
It takes a committed city council to accomplish what Arvada did, and it took several elections to obtain the 4 votes we needed to pass the ordinance. Next slide, please. Challenges will inevitably come. Council faced the threat of a recall before our vote was even cast. I am especially appreciative for all the hardworking volunteer members of ASAC who kept council well informed, and for the industry knowledge, passion, and hard work that Randy brought to the process. Next slide, please.
And our hard work did pay off, as on June 15th, or actually in the wee hours of June 16th, after 5 hours of testimony, the Organized Waste and Recycling Ordinance passed on a 4-3 vote. We were very successful in getting a great turnout of supporters that really gave the backing our city council champions needed to cast their vote. Next slide, please. So finally, the new contract is with Republic Services, and it was approved on that June 15th meeting. The contract will last for 5 years with the potential to renew 2 additional years before the city will put it out for another bid. Republic will provide weekly trash collection and bi-weekly recycling collection. Additionally, there will be bulky item and yard waste collection events, and the prices for residents are locked in for 2 years, and then after 2 years, prices may only increase under specific terms of the contract with proof that the operational costs are going up and must be linked to a national index. HOAs may choose to opt in, but all HOA homes will be charged 88 cents a month for the bulky item and yard waste collections that they'll be able to participate in. And then finally, non-HOA homes may choose to opt out of the program as required by state law, but they will be charged $5.13 a month for opting out.
And Randy and Nancy, I'll just give you about a minute and a half left here on your 10 minutes. Thanks.
Well, we're actually done, Jonathan.
I thought that might be the case. Good job. Well done. Well, then you have another minute and a half to add any final comments you have.
Well, I just want to say that this is our contact information, so please feel free to reach out to us with additional questions. And of course, we look forward to the question and answer session that will follow the presentations and the breakout.
Great. Thank you both so much, Randy and Nancy, and congratulations. That's a huge lift and a really big accomplishment. I can say that very with a lot of confidence in my own experiences. So good job. And I think there'll be quite a few questions for you when we get there. So hold tight on those, and we'll see you again here shortly. Now I'd like to turn it over to Caroline Mitchell from the city of Fort Collins to talk about her role in the efforts to do some regional planning around waste. Caroline. And you are muted. Let me, if you want to unmute yourself there.
Yeah, great start. I'm gonna rev back up. So yes, my name is Caroline Mitchell. I get to work for the city of Fort Collins in the sustainability services area. My area of focus is waste reduction and recycling. And before I share more about this project, I just want to reiterate that this project was a regional collaboration. There were a lot of individuals from different organizations that helped to create this. So I happen to be the person who's telling you about it right now, but by no means was this my project. This is a big old collaboration. Next slide, please. So the setting that initiated this project is that the Larimer County landfill is slated to reach capacity in 2024 with no options for additional expansion. And so the Larimer County landfill is not the only landfill available in northern Colorado, but it's a really key component of the regional waste disposal options, and the imminent closure of that landfill provided that urgency and that impetus for the regional partners to start talking more seriously about what would come next. Next slide. So the partners that collaborated on this project are Larimer County, the city of Fort Collins, the city of Loveland, the town of Estes Park, and the town of Wellington. And this was a long project. We started meeting in 2014. And honestly, when the staff members from the different entities first started getting together, really we just knew the landfill was going to close. That was going to be a big change. What should we do? It was really amorphous for kind of a while. And we were able to receive a grant through the CDPHE's RREO grant program, which helped to start coalescing this into a project. It was an initial consulting project around what next version of the waste shed could look like. And after that, Larimer County funded substantial additional consulting to really develop this planning process. And some of the keys that were really important throughout this planning process was that our elected officials were very closely involved early on and throughout the entire process. I think they started meeting in 2015. So we had 2 elected official representatives from each of the jurisdictions that would provide their input during the planning process and also helped them have buy-in when it came to decision-making time. And of course, we had a broad group of a stakeholder advisory group that we worked with throughout. So of course, essential partners like our haulers and other entities in the other groups in the community were involved throughout as well. Our next slide. So the end result of those 5 years of planning was a solid waste infrastructure master plan that was adopted by Larimer County at the end of 2018. And then also an intergovernmental agreement that confirmed all of the commitments of the folks involved throughout the project. So this slide lines out some of the key highlights of that intergovernmental agreement. One of the goals of that intergovernmental agreement was to bridge that gap that exists between material generation and building facilities. You can't build a facility without materials to feed it, and you can't adopt programs that are going to generate materials without a facility to take them to. So in this intergovernmental agreement, there are tonnage threshold triggers, if you will, where if any of the communities in the waste shed adopt policies that are likely to generate X number of tons, the facility that would process that material would then move to the build list from the county. The county would then build that facility. With more specificity here, Larimer County's commitment is to build, fund, own, and manage all of the new facilities. And that is possible because the Larimer County landfill is an enterprise fund and has built up facility replacement funds over the years that were available for this project. The commitment on the part of all the regional waste shed partners is to consider code changes and policies that would support the regional waste shed infrastructure, continue to have elected officials participate in that policy council. So we still have 2 elected officials from every community that are involved in this ongoing policy council for the regional waste shed project, and we plan to have that for the long term. And then we're also working together to coordinate regional education together. So if we go to the next slide, this is the actual infrastructure that we landed on. So the Larimer County is in the process of constructing a new landfill. They had purchased land in northern Larimer County over 10 years ago for possible landfill development. And that was one of the points of analysis through this project, is determining whether Larimer County did want to build a new landfill there. So there is a new landfill under development in northern Larimer County. And then all of the rest of the facilities are actually going to be sited adjacent to the current landfill. So Larimer County owns land adjacent to the current landfill that hasn't been landfilled. And it's a really great site because it's central within the county. It's right between the 2 population centers of Loveland and Fort Collins. So that will be the site for the central transfer station that is also under development right now. So residents and haulers will continue to take material to the same site they're familiar with, and then that material will be condensed and hauled up to the new landfill. Next slide. The other facilities that are not yet under development, but that are included in the plan, are a construction and demolition debris processing or recycling facility, as well as yard and food waste composting. And we can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, the Intergovernmental Agreement confirms the policy that would be needed for some of these facilities to be constructed. So the new landfill and the central transfer station don't require any policy involvement from any of the regional waste shed communities. Those are planned to operate in the same free market system that the Larimer County landfill has operated over the decades. However, the other 3 diversion facilities would require some sort of a policy intervention or policy participation. The city of Loveland has already moved the yard waste composting facility onto the build list because they have a municipal collection program for the residents in their community, and they've already committed the yard trimmings from that residential collection to the Larimer County yard waste composting facility once that is built. The food waste composting portion of that facility we know is still a few years out, and so policy hasn't been developed around that yet, but it is definitely a topic of conversation in the communities, and we're continuing to work together on that topic. And then construction and demolition debris has been addressed by Fort Collins. Last spring, Fort Collins adopted an ordinance that will require mixed loads of construction demolition debris to go to that county recycling facility once it's constructed. So it doesn't apply to separated materials. So at a construction or demolition site, if the site chooses to separate out material like scrap metal or cardboard or aggregates and haul that to a different recycling site on their own, they're absolutely welcome to do that. And if they choose to have all of the materials mixed together in one bin, then those would be required to go to the county's construction demolition recycling site. Again, all that did is move that into the build list, essentially, portion of the planning. That facility is not, it doesn't exist yet, and we haven't gotten to the the details of building it yet, because this is a lot of infrastructure to build in a short amount of time. All right, the next slide, please. So of course, in any big project, we had a number of lessons learned. And I'm just going to touch on these very briefly right now, and we can talk about these more in depth with anyone who chooses to go into this breakout session. And
Caroline, you have about a minute and a half left here. Thanks.
Thank you. So one of the things that I think was really important in this project is that we had a reason to coalesce. There was a sense of urgency because the Larimer County landfill was reaching capacity. So, you know, communities can have all sorts of different reasons that it is time to coalesce, but that was sort of a helpful component of this project, I believe. Relations are super important. This is not easy work. This takes a long time and it's uncomfortable in a lot of fronts. It involves a lot of collaboration and a lot of, you know, in the regional watershed communities here, we have communities of all different sizes with all sorts of different systems of how the materials are collected in within their jurisdiction. And we just had to commit to our relationships with each other and our commitment to the broader goal and develop a project that was going to work best for everyone. The process really matters. I guess you know, it's important to be able to have a process so you can all make sure you're working on the same thing at the same time. I had already mentioned the importance of working with our stakeholders and elected officials and the public. Again, be patient, it's a long project. And the one thing you gotta know is that everything's gonna change during the project development, and that once you've adopted the plan, your project isn't done. Now you get to the hard work of implementation. And that's the phase we're all working together in right now, where yet again, we're full of changes. So happy to talk more in the breakout session. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Caroline. And Caroline's contact information is up on this slide, which I'll leave up while I introduce the folks from the city of Boulder. We're gonna have Kara and Sandy talk a little bit about their universal zero waste ordinance and the work that they've done. So I will turn it over to the Boulder team.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Jonathan, Tiffany, Jennifer, Caroline, Nancy, all super interesting discussion about how we got to where we are today and the regional issues around collaboration. The city of Boulder has a long history of zero waste programs, and I'm going to be just talking briefly about the history, and then I'll turn it over to Sandy, who will talk about Boulder's most recent regulations. So the next slide, please. Actually, my first talking point starts before this slide shows, and that's back in 1976. We had a fleet of old yellow school buses collecting recyclables, one neighborhood at a time, and that was operated by EcoCycle. In 1989, the city instituted a trash tax, which pays for all of our zero waste programs, and the trash tax is actually an occupation tax on trash haulers in the city of Boulder. Paid to the city based on the number of customers and the amount of trash that they're collecting. In 1990, soon after the trash tax was put in place, the city began to contract for curbside recycling collection. It was a three-way contract at the time. City paid the bills, Western Disposal did the collection, and EcoCycle did the processing. Then about a decade later in 2000, we recognized that the trash tax wasn't keeping pace with the costs of that collection program, and City Council made a choice to shift from controlling our, having municipal control over our curbside recyclables to having what we call a regulated open market or a regulated free market for recycling collection. And what that means is we have an open market similar to what Randy was describing currently exists or used to exist in Arvada. And what we say is if you're collecting recyclables in Boulder, then you must also collect, we basically regulate you to must also collect unlimited recyclables. So that was what passed in 2000. And then almost a decade later, in 2009, the Boulder County Recycling Center upgraded to process single stream recyclables. And at that time, what the city of Boulder did was to require that all haulers take, so we used to get recyclables picked up on alternating weeks, cans and glass containers 1 week. The alternating week was paper. When the recycling center went to single stream, we essentially had a free route that we repurposed for compostables collection from the residential sector. Our trash tax has a investment philosophy to invest in sustainability or zero waste programs that aren't viable for the private sector to invest in, and then spin it off once either the economic shift sufficiently or participation is high enough that it's viable for the private sector to take it over. And that's essentially what the sentiment was of the city of Boulder when we went to this regulated free market system. Folks in Boulder had already had almost 30 years of getting used to recycling, and we figured that people weren't going to stop recycling if they needed to pay for it as part of their bundled trash. And we do also have requirements that haulers charge pays to throw kind of volume-based rates for trash, that they report to the city annually on the amount of trash and recyclables that they're picking up as well. So then in 2015, city staff approached city council. We were at approximately 30% community-wide diversion at the time. And our multifamily complexes were only at about 14% diversion. Businesses were at about 20% diversion, sorry. And then the single families were over 50%. So we approached council and they said, yes, it's time to move from a voluntary program to a mandatory program. Please develop an ordinance that focuses on the businesses and the multifamily sectors. The way that City of Boulder does things is we had a big, long public process and focus groups. And what was interesting was that the focus groups encouraged us as staff to develop a universal zero waste ordinance that Sandy is going to talk about. And as compared to the initial approach that would have only required recycling and composting in the lower performing sectors, the commercial and multifamily sectors, the focus group said, hey, wait a second, we've been recycling for a really long time. And if you require us to add more bins, then it's going to exacerbate illegal dumping and really just pull off the Band-Aid, require everyone to do it. We've surveyed, even the hauling companies mentioned that they had surveyed their commercial customers and there was general support for mandatory recycling across the board. And EcoCycle also coordinated advocates in our community so that council members felt like they had their back. And as Randy was saying, in Arvada, we had a bit of that inside-outside pressure going on at the same time. And the premise behind the Universal Zero Waste Ordinance for Boulder was that the city assumed if recycling was easy, convenient, and understandable, that people would participate. So our Universal Zero Waste Ordinance only requires that every single property owner in the city subscribe to trash recycling and compost service. So that single family residents, multifamily residents, all commercial businesses must subscribe to trash recycling and compost. And furthermore, because about 75% of our businesses are in leased space, all the businesses must use that service by providing bins and signs and education to their customers, to their employees, and bins and signs to their customers. So the idea behind our Universal Zero Waste Ordinance is to create an environment where the easiest and least expensive option is the environmentally sustainable option, and that it should be equally accessible to renters, homeowners, students, or visitors, that everyone should have the same services available to them. I'm going to turn that over to Sandy and she'll talk about the details.
Great, thank you so much, Kara. So that is how the USBO came to be, and now it was time to put it in action. To do this, we knew like a whole lot of outreach and education would be necessary prior to starting enforcement on it. So we did phase in our approach to implementation. Having a couple of years between the passing of the ordinance and enforcing it allowed us to do a few things. Number one, leveraging our community partnerships that were totally invaluable for boots on the ground outreach. We also hired a 2-year fixed-term compliance specialist specifically for conducting outreach and education before and into the enforcement phase. We also developed many resources during this time in order to provide universally consistent materials and information for the encouragement of easy participation. Thank you, Jonathan. Well, some of those things included creating a video series. We also translated several of those into Spanish. We made a do-it-yourself compliance guidebook, also standardized and printable sign templates, also an option to make custom signs using materials specific to an individual business. Then in 2017, enforcement officially began. It initially was by complaint only through 2018, at which time we enacted the requirement within the ordinance that certain businesses report compliance with the ordinance to us directly in 2019. Next slide, please. So in order to manage the workload for reviewing and approving self-reported compliance, we also wanted to phase this process in by sector and needed to prioritize which businesses would be required to report first. Most obviously, compostable material volumes were a key factor in this, and food producers quickly rose to the top of that list. We therefore started with restaurants and grocery stores in 2019, with intentions to expand to other food producing sectors in 2020, in addition to requiring restaurants and grocery stores to report again, as it is an annual requirement. Unfortunately, COVID derailed this plan, and we have not required reporting in 2020 or conducted any kind of enforcement since early March.
And Sandy, we're down to about 2 minutes. I know they've got a few slides left, so just wanted to let you know.
No worries, thank you. So another important piece of the first year reporting criteria remained food related, but it accentuated the community and visibility and participation inherent in self-busing restaurants. So we did focus quite a lot on them in outreach. Simultaneously, we were thinking of next reporting steps and needed to decide if offices were to be included in future reporting requirements. We therefore conducted waste audits of 3 of our own city buildings to determine if requiring offices to report would be worth it. The answer turned out to be no. We determined the small amount of quality compostable materials and the total amount of compostable material quantities were negligible in the bigger diversion picture. Also important to note is that throughout implementation of the self-reporting requirements, our green bag giveaway program encouraged early reporting then, and we're using it to encourage voluntary reporting now. So next slide, please. So regarding enforcement then, finally, the biggest learning that we encountered involved the resource constraints on the part of the Code Enforcement Division. We therefore developed a shared process with them in order to supplement our effectiveness and achieve greater overall compliance. Compliance is not one size fits all with this, and it does have some nuance and the need for interpretation and flexibility at times. Enforcement also does involve several exemptions that are available, and we do consider an approved exemption to the ordinance to be compliance. We had very few that were requested, however, mostly small quantities for offices, some breweries that were innovating by feeding their spent grain to cows. Certainly happy to share a lot more detail on all of this in the Q&A and in the breakouts. But as for the future, Kara?
So thank you. The next slide, if you would, Jonathan. This just shows a little picture that Jonathan was referencing at the beginning. We are at 50% diversion for the city of Boulder today, and we're looking at what we need to do next to move beyond that. And so we are starting to look at how to create more of a circular economy and less just managing our waste materials, but looking more at materials management. And so this was just a graphic that was just designed as part of a visioning process we had around Circular Boulder.
Great. Well, thank you so much to all of our presenters. three very important but different topics as approaches for local governments to address their zero waste goals, with Arvada's example of working to really wrap their arms around the residential waste collection system and make major improvements there and take a really big first step. And the regional effort from Fort Collins and Larimer County to look at shared resources and make things more efficient. And then, of course, the Universal Zero Waste Ordinance from Boulder. So now's our chance to ask some questions. I know I have some, but I think I'll start with some of the ones that came in from chat. And I'm going to stop sharing the presentation, and if we'll go through the chat, and then I think we may have a few minutes to allow people to ask additional questions, and feel free to turn on your cameras and mics at that time. I'll try to manage that best possible, but I think this will be best if we all get to look at each other. And I'm going to see if I can stop share here. Did I get everybody back? You all here? All right. Great, give me 1 second. So I'm gonna pop up my chat here. Okay, so question has come in for Caroline. The question is, I'm curious whether you believe that mixed C&D, construction and demolition waste, must be flow controlled to the new facility, or will just requiring that C&D waste be recycled, assuming it's the easiest and cheapest, to go to the public mixed waste C&D processing facility?
That's a great question, Kara. Thank you for the softball.
It's intended to be a softball. I'm actually super curious about that, because in Boulder, we feel like if we just require that it be recycled, if it's close by, people will use it, but not sure if that's pans out in reality.
Yeah, to be honest, it's a really great question, which is why I make the joke about the softball. And I wouldn't say that there's 100% clarity that one direction or the other is the only way to go. In this case, because it was closely tied to that intergovernmental agreement, we decided that it was worth it to just be clear, because we wanted to, it was part of the commitment of that intergovernmental agreement to that facility specifically, not to a general construction and waste demolition recycling facility. And to some degree, it's sort of one and the same. There aren't any mixed construction demolition recycling facilities in Northern Colorado right now. Presumably, when the county would build one, theirs would be the only. But in the discussions that we had, the consensus ended up being that specifically because of that intergovernmental agreement, it made the most sense to identify that facility. But it's a great question, and I wouldn't say that's necessarily a universal requirement. It was more, I think, specific to the situation in Northern Colorado.
Great, thanks. Our next question is for the folks from Boulder, and the question is, have the public zero waste bins been well utilized, and do you have any major contamination problems with the public bins? I think many of our communities, that's a huge challenge and maybe even a sticking point to getting bins out in the first place, the fear of contamination.
So yes and yes. They
And
are
yes, and yes.
and they are highly contaminated, I would say. EcoCycle helped us do a waste audit of some of those public bins, and the biggest contaminant is actually coffee cups. So we were just working to identify alternatives for some of the coffee shops that are located around the public bins, and then, like everything, COVID hit, and we haven't progressed very far on that effort. But our goals in Boulder are twofold. One of them is around diversion, but another one is around participation. And so there's parts of our program, like Sandy was talking about, we decided to focus our enforcement on the businesses that generated the most waste, so that we were sure our resources were being used efficiently and effectively. But on the other hand, we also want to create a situation where everyone in Boulder feels like they can participate in our zero waste programs. And so we are, this is a bit controversial, but we're willing to throw out contaminated recyclables in an effort to move our community to be more and more used to sorting correctly over time. And so we realized that we want everyone to participate. And we also realized that the back of the house bins at restaurants are much less contaminated than the front of the house bins at restaurants. So the customer facing bins, sometimes that material gets thrown in the trash because it's too contaminated to be recycled. The back of the house, for the most part, tends to actually go in the correct bin, the compost bin, the recycling bin, and the trash bin, because the employees are trained better than visitors or customers. And we're okay with that for now.
Great, thank you. I have a question for the Arvada folks. I'm wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about what the biggest community concerns and pushback that you received of those items or issues. Which of those were you able to address? And, you know, were there certain topics where you were able to bring support from folks that maybe at first were not in favor of an organized trash system?
Nancy, do you want to start?
Well, I think there was a lot of pushback in Arvada about people's rights in choosing. And that one is a difficult one that I don't know, Randy. I think we weren't always successful with that. I think for us, it's the individual conversation. I think of a woman just recently who I talked to, and she was very, very hot and heavy about the program. And once I really took time to explain it to her, she was excited about it and is actually a proponent of it at the moment. So, and I guess the opt-out fee, Randy, wouldn't you say was a big one?
Definitely. There was a lot of conversation on social media about the opt-out fee and how it was, you know, illegal to charge people for something they weren't getting a service for and things like that. And, you know, I think we did the best we could in trying to explain how the opt-out fee was to enable the single hauler or the contracted hauler to come in and provide a service for the whole community. And without that opt-out fee, they can't guarantee prices and they can't make that kind of commitment to then serve the whole city. So it's really an integral part of it. And we know from other communities that they, you know, the opt-out, you know, is a very low percentage, and then over time it drops. And the people, you know, Nancy and I always talk about how hard change is, right, for any community and whatever you're going to do. And this is a major, major change for our community. But again, what we see in other communities that have gone through this before us is that they, people resist that change initially, but once the program is up and running, then people really start to see and appreciate the benefits of that, and a lot of that opposition then goes away. So, you know, fingers crossed that we'll have as smooth as possible transition, and that those benefits of the program will really come out, and that people will appreciate that.
Great. We're right up against when we wanted to start our breakouts, but I think there's one or two more questions that seem really good here, maybe for the whole group before we do that. So with keeping in mind that we'll want to address these fairly quickly, I'm going to throw out a couple more and then we'll go to our breakouts. And those of you with want to dig a little deeper will have an opportunity. So a great question that's come up is for Boulder. And the question is, as you look at the kind of circular economy effort, you know, have you come up with ways to, oh, I lost my spot here. Has the city come up with metrics to reflect reduction in use of material? So I think this is getting to, you know, in the carbon, you know, gas emissions, the avoided emissions. Is there a metric to track avoided waste as people become more educated and or our systems get a little stronger?
No, it's an excellent question, and it's one that we are struggling with right now. I just sent Ann Peters a private message saying, will you be on a team to help us figure out what our metrics should be, since she asked this question? And I do, you know, it's particularly difficult in Boulder. We have 109,000 people that live in Boulder, and then an additional 58,000 people in commute every day, or before COVID, 58,000 additional in commuters. And just the fact that just like any city, we are a service center, and most of our embodied emissions originate outside of our city borders. So it is something that we struggle with, and we are trying to come up with some of those metrics now. The best we've had so far is just measuring reuse to the extent that we could measure reuse, but we really do want to move beyond that to look at actual materials consumption. We did a study, and anyone could Google circular Boulder report, that looked at all the materials coming into our city and what happens to them while they're here, and then how we can be more efficient before waste is created in the first place. So we are basing our next metrics conversation on the results of that very study. But we don't have any answers yet.
Can I have a quick follow-up question?
Yep.
Kara, how are you guys measuring reuse?
Well, we basically just survey our thrift stores. Some of them track how much, pounds of material comes in, pounds of materials out. And we have an amazing data person that works in our climate initiatives department, and she has mined for data and looked at reuse opportunities around our community. So we can certainly have an offline conversation, and we could connect with our data person. It's mostly just looking at defensible reuse.
Yep.
That's great, thank you. And then the last question we'll throw out here before our breakouts goes back to the folks in Arvada, and that question is, what advice might you have to other municipalities looking to transition to a single hauler, as far as outside resources that would be helpful? And the specific question is beyond grants. Sounds like you were able to secure some funds to help pay for bins and bring some costs down, but I think this might be getting to other resources that might help staff or decision makers in the policy process. And maybe related to that is resources to help with administration. I'm not sure if you've put a dollar amount on the cost to the city to, even though it'll be private haulers, to kind of implement the program and oversee it, make sure there's compliance.
Well, I think you have to have a Randy, honestly, because seriously, Randy, EcoCycle was so helpful with this whole process because they really had the industry knowledge. I think we had a lot of very smart and have a lot of very smart people on our ASAC committee, but I truly believe it was that industry knowledge that helped. I remember when Randy came on to ASAC, and I do believe that was a big change for us. As far as the cost, I know that the finance department has looked into that, but I couldn't tell you offhand without going back to them, what it really is going to cost us. I'm not quite sure how many people we have to hire as a result of the program yet, but do you know that, Randy?
Well, we had, there's the upfront costs that Nancy spoke to that will, we use that loan to pay it, and then it gets paid off over 6 years by the fees themselves. And the city staff told me that the fees also will pay for the ongoing operational costs. I don't know what those will be, the exact figure. We can try to find that out. But they are, it's all factored in when the city did the contract and set the fees, that it would make sure that it was, the city would stay in the black, so to speak, for that. And then thank you for the compliment, Nancy, but I will just say that I think,
True.
having the ASAC, we had a lot of very passionate people that was so integral into, getting the work done that we needed to do to be out in the community and get the support we needed for it. And also to work with city council and the city staff. And also I would say that, on the industry knowledge piece, I think, the city did have a consultant that they hired. And so I think, other cities that are looking for that, I would highly recommend that they look into hiring a consultant who knows, again, how to write a contract and how to negotiate that and an RFP and all that process. The city, tapped into experts to do that as well, and that was really very important.